It's time you moved out, so I sold the house before he got home from work. My son looked me dead in the eye, set down his fork and said, Mom, it's time you moved out. I smiled, nodded and said, You're right, sweetheart. It is time. What he didn't know was that I had already called a realtor that morning. By the time he came home from work 3 weeks later, the house wasn't mine anymore. It wasn't his either. And the look on his face when he pulled into that driveway is something I will never ever forget. Before I tell you how it happened, hit that like button, subscribe if you're new here, and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching this from. I read every single one of them, and honestly, on nights like the one I'm about to describe, knowing that strangers out there care about an old woman's story is what got me through. Now let me tell you everything. My name is Anna. I'm 68 years old, and for 41 years, I lived in a little brick house on Maple Hollow Road with my husband, Frank. We bought that house when we were young and broke and in love, back when the neighborhood was just dirt roads and half-built frames. Frank and I raised our son Daniel in that house. We painted his bedroom blue when he was 7 because he wanted to feel like he was sleeping in the sky. We hosted his birthday parties in that backyard every single June. I taught him to ride a bike on that driveway, and I bandaged his knee on that same driveway more times than I can count. Frank passed away 4 years ago. Heart attack, sudden, no warning. One day he was fixing the gutter, complaining about his back, and 3 days later I was picking out a casket. I won't dwell on that because this isn't a story about grief, though grief is always sitting somewhere in the room when you're my age. This is a story about what happened after. After Frank died, Daniel and his wife, I'll call her Melissa, suggested I not live alone. They had a point. The house was big, I was newly widowed, and my knees weren't what they used to be. So about 2 years ago, Daniel asked if he and Melissa and their son, my grandson Tyler, could move in with me. He said it would help them save money for their own place, and it would help me not be alone in that big empty house. I said yes before he even finished the sentence. Of course I said yes. He was my son. This was still my house. For the first year it was wonderful. I want to be fair here because too many of these stories paint everyone as a villain from the very first sentence, and that's not honest. Melissa helped me in the garden. Tyler, who was 9 at the time, used to climb into my bed on Saturday mornings and beg me to make pancakes shaped like his initials. Daniel fixed things around the house the way his father used to. For a while it felt like the house had a heartbeat again. Things started changing slowly, the way spoiled milk doesn't smell bad all at once. It starts with a hint of sourness you can almost ignore. It began with small comments. Melissa mentioning that the house could really use updating. Daniel saying things like, Mom, at your age, you shouldn't be climbing stairs anymore, which sounded like concern but always seemed to come right after he'd been looking at real estate listings on his laptop. I noticed he stopped calling it your house and started calling it the house like it belonged to nobody, or maybe like it belonged to everybody but me. I noticed the mail started arriving addressed to Daniel and Melissa instead of me. I noticed when the cable company called about a billing issue, they asked for Daniel by name like he was the account holder. I noticed my name slowly being erased from a life I had built brick by brick, meal by meal, birthday by birthday. Still, I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself that's what happens when you get old and lonely. You start looking for slights where there aren't any. I wanted so badly to believe my son still saw me as his mother and not as an obstacle. Then came the dinner that changed everything. It was a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were the night I made pot roast. A tradition from Frank's time that I never gave up. Tyler was at soccer practice. It was just me, Daniel, and Melissa at the table, the same oak table Frank and I bought secondhand back in 1987 and refinished ourselves over one long sweaty August weekend. Daniel cleared his throat in that particular way people do when they've rehearsed something. He set down his fork. And he said the words that are going to stay with me until the day I die. Mom, we've been talking and we think it's time you moved out. I actually laughed at first, thinking it was some kind of joke. But his face didn't move. Melissa stared at her plate like it had suddenly become the most interesting plate in the world. Moved out of my own house? I asked. Daniel had the audacity, the absolute audacity, to sigh like I was the one being unreasonable. Mom, be real. This house is way too big for one person, and Melissa and I have been thinking about our future here. Tyler needs his own space as he gets older. We were thinking maybe you could look into one of those senior communities. There's a nice one over off Route 9. They have activities and everything. I sat there, 68 years old, in the house my husband and I built our entire life inside of, being told by my own son that I should go live somewhere with organized bingo nights because my presence was inconvenient. "This is my house, Daniel," I said, as calmly as I could manage. "And this is the part one need you to really hear, because it's the part that turned my sadness into something else entirely." He looked at me and he said, "Not really, Mom. I mean, you're not going to be around forever, and it's going to be ours eventually anyway. Might as well start the transition now before things get, complicated." Before things get complicated. As if my death was an administrative inconvenience he was trying to schedule around. I want you to imagine that feeling. Imagine raising a child, giving him every good year of your life, sacrificing your body and your sleep and your youth, and having him sit across the very table you scraped together the money for and calculate your remaining usefulness like I was an appliance nearing the end of its warranty. I didn't cry at the table. I want that on the record. I have cried plenty since then, but not that night. That night, something in me went very quiet and very clear, the way the world looks right after a storm passes. I said, "You're right. It is time." Daniel actually looked relieved, like he'd been expecting a fight. Melissa finally looked up from her plate and gave me this little tight smile, the kind people give you at funerals when they don't know what else to do with their face. I finished my pot roast. I did the dishes. I went to bed in the room I had shared with Frank for decades, and I lay there and I made a decision. If they wanted to talk about this house like it was already theirs, like I was already gone, then I was going to remind every single one of us whose name was actually on that deed. The next morning, while Daniel was at work and Melissa had taken Tyler to school, I called my lawyer. I'd known him for 15 years, ever since he helped Frank and me with our wills. His name was Mr. Whitfield, a sharp, careful man who Frank always trusted completely. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, which I have always appreciated in a person. When I finished, he asked me one simple question. "Anna, is the house solely in your name?" It was. Frank and I had refinanced years ago after paying off the original mortgage, and for reasons that felt unimportant at the time, only my name ended up on the new deed. Daniel didn't know that. Daniel had always assumed it was jointly owned, or that it would simply become his one day without any legal complications, the way children sometimes assume inheritance is a birthright rather than a choice someone else gets to make. Mr. Whitfield asked what I wanted to do. I told him I wanted to sell the house. Quietly. Quickly. Before my son came home from work that day, if such a thing were possible, though I knew realistically it would take a bit longer than that. He laughed, not unkindly, and said selling a house properly takes weeks, not hours, but he could get the wheels turning immediately if I was serious. I told him I had never been more serious about anything in my life. That same afternoon, I called a realtor a friend of mine had used. A sharp young woman named Carol who didn't ask a single judgmental question when I explained the situation. She just said, "Anna, let's get you a good price and get you somewhere you'll actually be happy." I liked her immediately. For the next 3 weeks, I lived a secret life inside my own home. Every morning after Daniel left for work and Melissa dropped Tyler at school, Carol would come by with potential buyers, or I'd meet with Mr. Whitfield to sign paperwork, or I'd drive to look at a few condominiums near my sister's place 2 towns over. I told Daniel and Melissa I was getting my affairs in order and looking into that senior community they mentioned. They seemed pleased. Melissa even offered to help me pack, which I politely declined, telling her I wanted to handle it myself at my own pace. She didn't push. She was probably relieved not to have to spend a Saturday hauling boxes. The house sold faster than I expected, to a lovely young couple expecting their first baby, who cried actual tears when they saw the backyard. The same backyard where Daniel blew out birthday candles for 18 consecutive years. I signed the final paperwork on a Thursday morning at Mr. Whitfield's office, and I remember my hand was steady the entire time, which surprised even me. I want to pause here and say something important. I did not do this out of cruelty. I did not do this to punish my son in some petty, small-minded way. I did this because for the first time in 2 years, someone had made it painfully clear that I was living in a house where my presence was tolerated rather than valued, where my death was already being casually scheduled into someone's future renovation plans. I did this because I am still a person, not a piece of furniture waiting to be inherited. The closing happened on a Wednesday. I had already arranged movers quietly for that Friday, and I had already signed a lease on a bright, sunny 2-bedroom condominium 15 minutes from my sister. I chose Friday very specifically because Friday was the day Daniel always came home a little later than usual, stopping by the gym after work like he'd done every week for the past year. By the time he pulled into the driveway that Friday evening, expecting to find the house he had, in his mind, already halfway inherited, he found something else entirely. He found a moving truck. He found strangers, the sweet young couple with the baby on the way, standing in the front yard with a real estate agent, admiring their new home. He found a for sale sign that had already been swapped out for a sold sign. I wasn't there when it happened. I made sure of that. I was already 40 minutes away, sitting in my new condominium, sipping tea with my sister, when my phone started ringing. And ringing. And ringing. I let the first 3 calls go to voicemail. On the 4th I picked up. Mom, what is going on? There's people in our house. There's a sold sign in the yard. What did you do? I remember taking a slow sip of my tea before I answered, because I had spent 2 years letting my emotions get swallowed at that dinner table, and I was not about to rush through this moment. Daniel, I said, you told me it was time I moved out. So I moved out. And since it was my house, my name, my deed, I sold it. I'm sorry you and Melissa didn't get the chance to say goodbye to it properly, but you did tell me not to worry about complications. There was silence on the other end. A long, heavy silence. Mom, that's insane. Where are we supposed to go? We gave up our apartment. We put money into fixing up that place. And here's the thing I need you to understand. Every improvement they'd made, the new kitchen countertops, the updated bathroom fixtures, had been paid for using money I had given them, because they told me they couldn't afford both those upgrades and their share of the utilities. I hadn't forgotten that. I made sure the sale price reflected fair value, and I made sure through Mr. Whitfield that I owed my son absolutely nothing beyond what basic decency required, which was a phone call explaining the situation, one I was currently generously providing. I told him the truth. I told him that a person doesn't get to spend 2 years hinting that his mother is a burden, casually discussing her death as scheduling logistics, and then act shocked when she takes him at his word. I told him I loved him, that I would always love him, but that love does not mean allowing yourself to be erased from your own life by people who claim to care about you. He didn't have a response to that. What could he say? In the weeks that followed, there was a lot of noise. Angry calls. One truly awful voicemail from Melissa that I still haven't fully forgiven, though I'm working on it, because forgiveness, I've learned at 68, is something you do for yourself as much as anyone else. Daniel and his family ended up renting an apartment across town. A decent one, nothing terrible, just considerably smaller and considerably more expensive than living for free in his mother's house had been. It's been almost a year now. Things are civil between Daniel and me, though not what they used to be. He calls sometimes. He brought Tyler by my condo last month, and my grandson curled up on my new couch and asked if I could make pancakes shaped like his initials, and I nearly cried right there in my tiny, perfect kitchen, because some things, thank God, survive even when everything else falls apart. I don't regret what I did. Not for one single second. I think about that dinner table sometimes, about the casual cruelty of being told your death is being factored into someone's 5-year plan, and I think about how many women my age simply absorb that kind of thing, swallow it down with their pride, and quietly disappear into whatever corner their families allot them. I refused to disappear. I sold the house before my son got home from work, and in doing so, I think I finally, at 68 years old, remembered exactly who I was. If this story meant something to you, I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight, and if you've ever had to stand up for yourself the way I did, even when it broke your heart to do it, share that too. We're a community here, and stories like mine only matter if we tell them to each other. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more stories like Anna's, and I'll see you in the next one.